Paul,
Hey Fab, how you doing?
good yourself?
Good.
Good. So you had
Hot.
let's just yeah, it's hot. Let's just jump right in, if you will. I think you have an interesting topic about closing more deals. So
Well,
I'll let you take it
yeah,
away.
yeah. Well, sometimes like this week in particular, I had some people talk to me about you know I want you to train my reps on or my team on closing.
Okay.
And that's interesting because you want people to close, but usually when people aren't closing is because whether they're not closing or not getting sales or not able to go over objections, it's probably because there's other parts of the sales process that are lagging. It's an indication usually that you're not doing something else that you should be doing. And it usually follows back to, the discovery call. Have you taken the time to, most people know what the challenge is. Your client calls you, we're trying to sell this or we're trying to sell that. We're trying to fix this problem or that problem, or we're trying to create this opportunity. Most people are good at getting to that in the discovery call.
Right.
What people are not good at getting to in the discovery call usually is the needs, the desire, and what the company's trying to achieve once they solve this problem or created this opportunity. And the other thing they're not really good at is finding out the motivation of the client, the true motivation, like where, the ultimate need, the ultimate goal, what they're trying to get to. And if you don't do those three things properly, you can't really close properly. You're just closing with your eyes closed. You're just trying to push a solution without really understanding what it's going to do for them. So most people that say, I'm having a hard time closing, it's because they haven't taken the time to really understand how their product will bring, or service will bring, value to the client. Because if you really know the value that you're bringing, the close should be easy because the client's telling you what's important to him or her.
Right.
And if you're focused on anything else, if you're just trying to say, hey, you should buy this, without knowing what's going on, that's why people often say, well, help me close. Well, I can't help you close if your guys are not finding out really what it is that their clients need.
Right. So if I understand, maybe we're going a bit too far back here, but the reality is asking those questions, like what it means, like what's the value that they're looking, and so on and so forth, prevents you from being transactional, from what I understand. Basically, if I'm not asking questions, I'm just kind of sitting there and pitching, for lack of a better word, my product, you're really not differentiating yourself. I mean, I guess there's some exceptions if you have a unique product or the only product on the market, or if you have some sort of monopoly, but overall you just you're not showing real value per se. You're just showing what the product does.
Showing value, or exactly, if you're just showing what your product does, you're not showing value because, we've said this in the past, your client, potential prospect, lead, whoever it is, doesn't give a crap about your product. Right. They don't care who or what your product is. What they care is how you're going to help them achieve their objectives.
Right.
So if you're not getting to there and you're just trying to push a shiny object, well, then, you might be trying to close in an empty world, and then it's hit or miss, right?
Right. Right.
And really, any stages, if you're skipping any stage of your sales process, particularly the ones where you're discovering what the challenge, needs, desire, motivation are, that's critical. But after that, you need to properly qualify, quantify. You need to know if they're willing to invest. You need to know their timeline. You need to know the urgency of what they're trying to achieve. Where you feel the urgency, because if they have a whole bunch of other objectives that they're trying to reach, and you're not the most important one on there, well, then you need to understand, well, they have other priorities, they need to this or that before they talk to me. So if you know that, you're in a much better situation. And then maybe that's you're not closing. It may be even that your product is great, but you're not closing because you're not the highest on the priority list. You're not what they need to do immediately.
Right. And so so basically you're by asking those questions, but then, I mean, I guess then your question that you initially posed about like, oh, can you help me close more? It's less about necessarily maybe more like closing, but it's just about being more, having a more predictive pipeline in a way. And that, like if I'm able to cancel or to disqualify you or to add a lower value to the deal because, I'm way far down the priority list, I'm still not going to close that deal, or probably not going to close it, but at least there's something more realistic about it, right? I'm not indicating that it's a high probability deal or whatnot.
Well, that's interesting. There's that. And absolutely, if you manage the expectations, or how the pipeline, where they really are in the pipeline or in the funnel, you'll understand a lot better on how to handle said probability. But really, anyone who tells me they're not closing, I'm going to ask the question why, and I need to go backwards. Let's equate. I don't play golf, but if someone says, "Hey, I want to hit the ball 300 yards," right? I'm not hitting the ball 300 yards. Well, often you have to go back and redo their swing, see how they stand, what the club length are. There's a lot of things in the process before you can hit the ball 300 yards.
Right.
You even need to go to the gym and pump some iron. I know nothing about golf, but that's whole. So if someone says, "Hey, why aren't I hitting 300 yards? What can I, jiggle or move?" Well, sometimes you need to go back. Start over again, and there's no jiggling and moving anything. It's just the fact that you need to practice something before you get there. So closing is the same thing. Yes, some people think it's just asking for the order, but it's not. It's a lot more than that.
Right. So it's like
stages before that. It's value. It's are they willing to invest? What's the challenge? Because usually when you know all those things, it's more a question of when do we get going?
Right. Because what I'm hearing is like, so yes, on the one side, asking questions allow you to maybe have a more authentic pipeline, because otherwise you're just kind of going on guesswork. Like, oh, we had a great talk. Like, I'm pretty sure this is going to close, but you never found out that you're actually very low on the priority list. But two, what I'm hearing, and if I could draw a parallel with some marketing stuff, is that, marketing usually kind of have to not let people like figure stuff out on their own. You really have to guide people through, because there's a lot of distractions and so on and so forth. Obviously your brand can play into that as well. But anyway, and what I'm hearing about you is like, by asking questions, is like, you're not leaving people alone with figuring out, well, what is the value of this, right? Because how many times have we spoken? Well, I know you're consultative, so probably maybe it doesn't happen that often, but you're a rep and you speak to somebody and then they come back to the price and then they're like, oh, I need to get this approved now. And basically what you're doing is you're leaving this buyer with the need to then go back internally and justify the budget and have to do like the math and then come back to you with, you know what I mean? Like, but if you've helped them understand the value of what you bring by the questions that you ask early on in the process, well, then it becomes a lot easier to justify a certain investment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. If the need and the want and the motivation and the challenge has all come from the client, asking for the business, if it's a logical step, will be easy. If I just knock at your door and say, "Hey, you want me to build you an extension?" it might be hit or miss, and you're saying, "Well, my extension builders are not closing enough." Well, they need to ask more questions to find out before they close.
Yeah, they're just going door to door and asking, "Can I build an extension?"
Yeah.
As opposed to like dive deeper. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I could see why your closing rate would go up, because if you're just going door to door, so let's say the equivalent, let's bring it back to B2B. If you're just doing a whole bunch of cold call and cold emails, basically you're closing in the off chance that you actually get somebody who happens to have a problem that you solve. Whereas if you're able to ask questions, you might even help somebody realize that they had a problem that they maybe were not aware of, or maybe not aware of the actual impact of their problem. Yeah. Maybe they're like, "Yeah, my reps aren't closing, but it's okay." But then in questioning them, you realize they're starting to realize, "Oh, wait, I'm actually leaving a lot of money on the table. Maybe this is a bigger, training my reps is a bigger issue than I thought it was."
Exactly. So essentially, when I hear that, I know that there's a lot more going on. And usually, when there's a set demo and they have a really defined product that doesn't vary very much according to the client, a lot of teams get sucked into, we'll do a great demo and then we'll just try to close. That's where that falls apart, because you might have a great product that might be wonderful, but if you're not taking the time to understand how your product helps the client, you're not. Even if your product doesn't change, even if your product's always the same,
right?
You're not taking the time to understand how that's going to affect the client, you're going to have a hard time closing.
Right.
Because a lot of companies do that. Well, we'll teach you how to present, we'll teach you how to make it look really good and whatnot, and they won't be able to resist. Well, the people who do well are the ones that find out how it's going to connect to their potential client's business.
Yeah, and I mean, even they spend a lot, marketing spends a lot of time putting together decks and all that stuff. There's a whole bunch, and I'm not saying it's unimportant. It's just like, it's probably not the most important thing in the world, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure a client likes to see a nicer looking deck than an uglier one, but the reality is what they want to know is that, is this for me? Are we wasting our time here? What's the value that you're bringing me? Fine, I have a new social media tool, but do I really need a social media tool right now? It looks cool. Your presentation looks great, but do I really need this right now? I don't know.
Exactly.
And by asking questions, you're helping them figure that out. Right? So what I'm realizing, what you're saying is that it's asking questions is not necessarily about, yes, on the one hand, it's you having a better understanding who the client is and what their motivations are and all that stuff, all their needs and everything. But it's also for them, because they might not always be able to put, last time we talked about, attaching value or quantifying, or I don't remember how you placed it, but attaching value to what you're bringing. And by asking questions, you're helping them figure it out as well. Not everybody's aware of what value you can actually bring.
Absolutely.
Even if they're actively involved in the market, right? I'm actively looking for a sales consultant. They don't always know what's the difference between Paul and another guy, and it's the questions that differentiate you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, there has to be an upside or a value that the client particularly sees for you to be able to even think of closing, right? And you have to see it too as a salesperson. If you don't see it and you're like, okay, I'm gonna ask this question and that question, and you don't see the value, and you're just saying, well, I'm just going to try to close, and you haven't quantified it. You're like, you don't know where it's going to fit in. Well, you're going to have a hard time closing because you haven't even helped the client figure it out, and they haven't figured it out, and you haven't figured it out. So you're like, geez, what do I do?
Yeah, no, I get that. Cool. So then going back to maybe your initial question, which is like, if you feel that your salespeople aren't closing enough, it's probably more a symptom than a symptom of something deeper that needs to be addressed, as opposed to something that needs to get fixed. Like I'm not a golfer either, but your golf analogy, right? Like, it's not the problem that you're not hitting the ball hard enough. It's that there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you're not doing well, which is why you can't get to 300 yards. So if your reps aren't closing enough, it's because there's a whole bunch of things that they're not doing that are making it harder for them to close. And I mean, bringing me back to golf, it's not because you do all those things perfectly that you'll hit 300 yards each time, but at least you're giving yourself a better chance of achieving that 300 yards.
Exactly. And so if someone asks you that, whatever, it's sort of like if someone comes up to you and says, oh, we're having a hard time with this part of the marketing process. Well, you need to look at the whole thing to make sure if it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You can't just stop at one level. You need to go back and say, okay, what's actually going on? And they all follow each other,
Right.
In sales, there's sort of two big categories. There's what I see it as this. Okay. So I see it as what the client is trying to achieve, right? And how your solution, what your solution helps them, at what level your solution helps them. So let's say your client's trying to achieve a big objective, right? And they have a problem to get there, and you can help them solve part of the problem, because usually you're not the whole solution, right? You're not the one in it. So if you're helping them part of the problem, but you're the first step in getting them to the right position, well, then you're higher up the urgency ladder. So you need to understand where you are, right? But you need to understand the big picture, not just the challenge.
Right.
If you just look at the challenge and you're trying to close just based on the challenge, you haven't understood the big picture. And if you don't understand the big picture, you won't really be that partner, and you won't really be consultative, and it'll be harder for you to close. You're going to have to ask for the close. It's not flow naturally, as though, you know, you've taken the time to really understand. Say, okay, well, I think this is what you need to do, and we need to go there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense, Paul.
How do we wrap this thing up?
I think I covered it pretty well.
Close this.
Close this? I mean, I'm closing this stream. All right, bye, Paul. This was good.
Thanks, Fab.
All right, take care.